Hello and welcome to Chapter 1, Lesson 2. In this lesson, we're going to talk a little bit more about domains and DNS, okay? You remember that domain name lookup that we had to do, that we discovered that our the client browser has to do in order for it to find the IP address so it knows what server to send the HTTP request to. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that process. I'm going to switch over to my screen here. And I have my terminal open. So this is just search for terminal if you're using Mac or Linux, or you'll need to use some sort of, I would probably get some sort of terminal program on Windows that will mimic Linux terms. And I know they have them. That way the commands are the same. But otherwise you can use the Windows command line. But I would search for terminal for Windows if you're using Windows. But here we are in Linux, and I am just here on my home screen, and there is some software installed called Whois and Dig that we're going to be using here just to discover some things about how it works. So first, let me back up. Do you remember in our slides how we had the browser make the HTTP request or did a DNS lookup to the DNS server? And then the DNS server return the IP address, though in our case it was the 108.177.122.106. Well, how did it know what DNS server to get that information from? We kind of skipped over that part, and I'm going to show you a little bit deeper about how that process works. And the reason I'm going through this is because this is something that I didn't know for a long time, even after I had a job as a programmer. And I went to set up a server or a domain and I was really lost. So we're just going to go through a little bit. Again, this is going to be kind of high level, but we're going to understand some stuff. So I can actually do something called a Whois lookup. So when you register a domain, I don't know if you've ever registered a domain, but if you register a domain, what happens is there's these registrars. In case you've probably heard of GoDaddy, that's a real popular one, or even Google. But there's basically places where you can register a domain, and you don't own it, but you register it for usually a year or more at a time, and you'll pay somewhere between $5 and $15 or $20 a year to register a domain in your name. And these registrars, this is the kind of the high level deal. So the registrars they're gonna keep some information about you and about your domain. And more importantly, they're going to have a little bit of information stored on them called a name server. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump back in the terminal here, and let's just do a Whois. So the Whois is going to allow us to look up from the registrars. Okay, these are cached online, but this is going to allow us to look up who registered a specific domain. So let's look up google.com. Now, this gives us a lot of information, so I'm going to scroll back up to the top here. And one thing is, you can see at the very top, you have google.com is the registered domain that we looked up, okay? So this is in fact registered. If you try a domain that's not registered, you won't get this information, okay? But you don't see the actual person because there's something called privacy that they sell when you register. And I highly recommend if you do register a domain, you pay for the privacy. Otherwise, you will see the actual person's registration name, and you will see their email address and their phone. So this is public information that anyone can access. And you just saw me access it for Google. But they have privacy turned on, so you can't see too much about what's going on. But there is some useful information here. The useful information that you see here are these name servers. Now, you'll notice that there's 4 of them. There's usually at least 2. And the reason there's usually at least 2 is for redundancy. So what's going to happen is when your computer or your browser does a DNS lookup, it's going to try the first name server first. So it's going to go out and find ns1.google.com. And if that server happens to be down or it's too busy, it's going to move on and try ns2.google.com next, and then go down the line. So it adds a little bit of redundancy in case a server is down or too busy. On these servers, they store what's called DNS records. And these are basically just key value pairs. And what I mean by that is there's like an A record. So there's a record on there called A, and the A record will have the IP address stored in it, okay? And all of these servers will likely, or they should have, all the same DNS records stored on them, so that regardless of which of these name servers your browser actually hits, it will get the same records back. So let's look at what that is. I'm going to actually clear this off real quick. And I can use another software in the terminal called dig. And if I just dig google.com, you can see here that I did a dig on google.com, sorry. And this google.com responded with an A record. And you can tell it's an A record just because of the letter A right here. And then you can see that the IP address at this time that the A record is returning is 142.250.190.110. Now this is actually what's going to be returned to your browser, and that browser then can take that IP address and do the actual HTTP request to that server. So that's how you get an A record, or how your browser gets the A record. Now I can also use dig to do other things. So let's say, for example, I didn't send I'm not trying to do I'm not trying to get a web page. So I don't go to google.com. Let's say I'm an email server, a specific type of server that's trying to send email. Okay, so the email server is not going to send an HTTP request. It's going to send an SMTP request, okay? So it knows, so like if I send an HTTP request to google.com, okay, it's going to get the A record. The A record is going to handle that, okay? However, if I'm sending an email to google.com or gmail.com or something like that, it's going to send an SMTP request to google.com, okay? Now, when it does this, SMTP is just, that type of request is a secure mail transfer protocol, and it's just another protocol of how emails are supposed to be structured and how that gets sent across the internet. But we can actually look up, instead of an A record, what happens if mail traffic or email traffic hits the server. So again, I'm going to use dig, and instead I'm going to use a separate kind of, I'm going to look up a separate type of DNS record called MX. MX is just short for mail exchange. Okay, you're going to learn really quick that developers are lazy and they abbreviate as much things as they possibly can. So an MX record is a mail exchange record, and I can look it up for google.com. Now, again, there's multiple that are returned here because of redundancy issues, but for the most part, you can see that, and it goes by, this is what's called a priority. So these numbers here, it's going to try the lowest number first. So this one right here is actually the one that will likely get tried first. And if this server is available, then mail traffic is actually going to be sent to aspmx.l.google.com. Okay, so this is actually going to be a different type of server that's on the internet. It's not going to be a web service or a website application that's running. It's actually going to be an email server, okay? But it's running at this location. And that's how mail is going to be routed through the internet, or email will be routed through the internet. And so we have lots of different types of things like that. You know, we have MX records that work with mail. The A records give you the A records give you the IP address. There's another type of record that we're not going to be able to look up through here, but these types of records are called CNAMEs. Now, CNAMEs are just a type of record that handles subdirectories. So, for example, if I have www.google.com, the www is actually a subdomain. It's called a subdomain, okay? And typically, these would be routed to some sort of folder on the subdirectory on the server. They don't have to be, but there could be lots of different stuff. You can use www, or you can use mail or my.google, you know, that sort of thing. You could do analytics.google, and this is actually when you send out a request to a subdomain, then this analytics is going to be listed, if it exists. This is going to be listed in a DNS record called a CNAME. Okay, so they'll have a CNAME that'll be analytics, And any traffic that's trying to go to analytics, there'll be some sort of answer there, which will be an IP address or even a domain of where to send that traffic, because it may be different. So analytics.google will go to a different server possibly than just google.com or www.google.com. So I know that's a little confusing. Don't worry about it if you don't understand or whatever. I'm just trying to explain that these DNS servers use what's called DNS records to basically direct traffic. Okay, imagine them like an air traffic controller. It's like, oh, there's a cargo plane coming in, send them to this airstrip, and then then they see a passenger plane, they need to go to this airstrip. Okay, so you can send an HTTP request, and the DNS server is gonna be like, okay, they need an A record. Okay, so the A record is going to return an IP address, or it might be, hey, that's email traffic, and that needs a mail exchange record, and it's going to find the mail exchange and send that back. Okay, so that is how the DNS stuff works. There's one more type that I want to show you. There's a few other types that we're not going to get into in this video, but there's one that you can look up called TXT. Okay, and if I type dig txtgoogle.com, you can see that they have a number of TXT records, and these are basically used for anything that you want to set up for your server. So these, again, you don't want to put anything too crazy in here, but these are basically plain text information that can be stored at the domain level that can be accessed by the servers that are doing the DNS lookup, so they can actually get these records, and based upon these keys like Apple domain verification, they have this value here. So you can see that these have some sort of, so like DocuSign is equal to this, okay, or Google site verification is equal to this. So basically it allows you to store some sort of text information as a key value pair on here, so that servers can use this information or however it needs to. So this is just another type of record that's stored that's not really directing traffic as much as is giving the ability to look something up based on a TXT record. You'll find this oftentimes, like if I'm setting up a Google domain where I'm using like G Suite to set up a business email. So I'm not using gmail.com, I'm using like curtisparham.com, which is my name. Then Google would give me some sort of verification TXT record that I might put in here that would have a unique key here. And what they would use that for generally is when they're setting it up to prove that I own this domain, I put this record in my DNS server, and then they're like, okay, he has access to add a DNS record, he must own this domain. And so they kind of use it as a verification type thing, or kind of like a password, but basically just validation that you are who you say you are, that you own that domain, and you're setting up email for that domain, and you have access to do so. Okay, so I think we've gone deep enough into that. We got to use terminal, which, by the way, you don't have to use this. There's Whois and Dig tools online. Google has one. There's other ones that are free. But it looks cool, and it's really convenient to pull out your terminal. You're going to be using your terminal a lot when you're developing. Plus, it makes you look like a wizard. So if you want to look cool, you can always just sit down. Somebody's watching you, like, okay, who is curtisparham.com? And you might find out all kinds of information about me, like my email address and things like that, because perhaps I wasn't smart enough to buy privacy when I registered this domain. But I did register this domain, and I did buy privacy, so you can't get my email address here. But you can see what my name servers are set to. You can see that they're currently on namecheaphosting.com. So that gives you a little bit of information about how you could find out where my website is hosted. It could be on hosting.com. So you can do that with any valid domain out there and get some information, especially about where it's being served. So at any rate, I hope that's helpful, guys. I hope that didn't go too much into the weeds for you, but we're going to get started in the next video in a very practical way. We're going to write our first HTML document. we're going to actually load it into the browser and see something working. And so uh, this is probably about as crazy deep as things are going to get for a long time. So if you're confused at this point, don't worry about it. You can watch this again. It's actually not that important to learn how to code, but you will eventually learn this stuff and you'll have to kind of know it. So I just wanted to kind of put it out there as we were talking about how the internet works. Maybe you had a few questions about how the DNS lookup process happens. And so I just wanted to give you a high level explanation of that. All right, guys, well, have a wonderful day and I will see you in the next video.